Hi, how do you translate the noun sense, like a sense, into Dutch? Well, there are many options, and that's why we're going to take a look at them in this video. Sense is usually used with, for example, use your common sense, and it doesn't make sense, so we're going to focus a little bit on those ones. So let's start with sense as a feeling. Let's see a few examples here, 2 examples. Hij heeft gevoel voor humor. He has a sense of humor. And there you could say, well, it's more like a feeling, so you're going to use gevoel instead of sense. Well, not instead of sense, because sense doesn't exist in Dutch, it's an English word. But if you're saying, well, it has something to do with feelings, then use gevoel. Another example, ik heb het gevoel dat het hier warm is. I have the sense, or I sense it's warm here. And I have the feeling it's warm here. Then you can use het gevoel. All right. And now, about making sense. That's an interesting one. So, an example. Het heeft geen zin om het te doen. It does not make sense to do it. And here, how do you say making sense? Well, zin hebben om. Het heeft geen zin om. And om uses te, as you may already know. So, het heeft geen zin om te. Alright, so that's easy. Geen zinnen hebben om te, that means making sense or not making sense. Geen zin hebben om te. Zin hebben om te is making sense. Well, wait a bit. If you're using a person as the subject, because as we've seen, het heeft geen zin, it doesn't make sense. But if you're saying he doesn't make sense, then it gets a little bit complicated, because when you're using a person, in this example, ik heb zin om naar Nederland te gaan, you'll be like, I don't make sense to go to the Netherlands. That doesn't make sense. Little joke here. So, what does it mean then? Well, zin hebben om te means to feel like. So, for example, I feel like having an ice cream, or I feel like going to the Netherlands, like in this example. So how do you say he doesn't make sense? Well, then it gets a little weird in Dutch. We're going to try to avoid saying that a person doesn't make sense. For example, wat hij zegt is niet logisch. What he says isn't logical. Or wat hij zegt is logisch. What he says is logical. He makes sense. So, another way to say this is hij raaskalt. But this is a little bit negative. He's really making things up and he's saying really, really weird things. He doesn't make sense at all. So, what if you want to say he doesn't make sense, then you would use wat hij zegt is niet logisch, because we're not going to use this zin hebben om te with people. Good. Zin is also used in another sense. For example, if you're saying in die zin vind ik het goed. Or synonym, in dat opzicht vind ik het goed. In that sense, I think it's good. And here, zin is again translated as sense, but only in this typical structure, in die zin. Goed. Zin also means a sentence. For example, heb je zin om zinnen te schrijven? Do you feel like writing sentences? Alright, so remember, making sense, if something makes sense, het heeft zin om te. It makes sense Het heeft zin. So you can also use it without the te. Het heeft zin. It makes sense. Dat. But with people, then you can't really say that, or you can't use zin to convey that meaning. All right. Another way to translate sense is when you're saying something with meaning. For example, Kerstmis heeft meer betekenis voor kinderen. Christmas has more sense for kids, and then it has more meaning. Well, it's not really a nice sentence. Christmas can make a lot of sense to adults too. It's a nice way to connect with people and friends and family, etc., etc. But okay, I'm sure you understand that betekenis has the meaning of meaning instead of sense. All right? And now, common sense. Common sense in Dutch is gezond verstand. For example, gebruik je gezond verstand. Use your common sense. And that's gezond verstand. Typical combination together with verstand. Literally, it means a healthy mind. Use your healthy mind. But common sense, gezond verstand. All right? Sense sometimes can be translated as idee. For example, heb je een idee van wat je aan het doen bent? Do you have a sense of what you're doing? And there it's more like, you could also say, do you have an idea of what you're doing? Or do you have a clue of what you're doing? Then we're going to use idee. Right? And then not the last one, but the one just before, senses are also your sight, your hearing, the touching sense, and the other two I forgot. So, for example, we hebben 5 zintuigen. We have 5 senses, and that's het zintuig, like sight, hearing. I think balance is also a sense. Okay, but you understand that it is senses in that sense. We're going to use zintuigen, and you recognize also there's zin in there. All right, a last one is to translate sense as to have an awareness, and then we're going to use besef. For example, hij heeft geen besef van urgentie. He does not have a sense of urgency. He's not aware there is something urgent going on. All right, if you want to do exercises on sense, you feel free to join and become a member to this channel. You can see the join button there on the page, and then you will have exercises and an explanation of the sense, and on other videos of the sense in the community tab that you can open. See you there, and tot ziens!